The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library. Hello and welcome. My name is Richard Naylor. We have at the library been working with the University of Albany on a project regarding climate change, but also regarding climate change as it's reflected in the arts. And my guest today is Mary Valentis, who has a major role in that project. She's professor of English at Albany. She teaches literature, film, popular culture, and writing. She was a former reporter and columnist. She's also an author. She co-authored A Brave New You and Romantic Intelligence, How to Be as Smart in Love as You Are in Life, and co-author of Female Rage, Unlocking Its Secrets, Claiming Its Power. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're also director of the Center for Humanities.
It's the Center for Humanities, Arts, and Technosciences, and the acronym is CHATS. And actually, it's the Humanities Center at the University of Albany within the College of Arts and Sciences. And we've put on a lot of interdisciplinary programs. I think you were involved in the program about the James Family Celebration. We've also...
So we had psychology, which is science, and we had literature in that one.
And film.
And film.
We had Peter Bogdanovich here, who was doing a talk back and discussion about his film Daisy Miller. We've also done major programs on Herman Melville, and of course both James and Melville went to the Boys Academy here. And so we did that Herman Melville program at the Academy and all over too.
And that really gets us into the kind of collaboration and intersection that we were talking about between art and science. So many of those have both components, and we want to talk about that today in terms of climate change, which is the project that this particular program is a part of.
Well, climate change is a huge topic in humanities and arts at the moment. The University at Stony Brook and at Buffalo all have programs in climate change and the humanities. And so they're bringing together artists and writers and filmmakers and scientists to create interdisciplinary programs and do projects like we have done with the Upper Hudson Library Association.
So before we get into something that's really close to that, I know that one of the things that came out of some of the programming that we've done has to do with the communication, because I know when we had Chris Thorncroft, a doctor from atmospheric sciences here, he talked about how frustrating it is sometimes to try to communicate to people and they say, I don't believe in climate change, or I don't believe that has anything to do with people. And so I think today that became a bigger topic.
Well, there are many issues involved in communicating climate change science, and I would say that a couple of them involve the fact that nature has been politicized. The natural world has been, a red state or a blue state, and so politicians have jumped on nature and climate change as a kind of litmus test for saying who you are and what you believe in. So you have political issues, but you also have religious issues, and it's not it's really a matter of people believing that because the universe is the way it is, and there is some super being who says it's going to be this way forever, then that gets into climate change denying, and that has been the biggest barrier to communicating climate science. One of the other areas, I guess, is that climate science, it can be described in terms of graphs and data and what's going to happen in the next 100 or 200 years or even a millennium. And people don't identify with that kind of time span. And so that's one of the other problems we have in terms of climate communication.
Right. We do things for our grandchildren or way in the future, but then we don't want to make a change in Social Security for 6 months because it hurts right now.
And that's the whole thing. If it's not hurting us, or we don't see a kind of real situation, then climate change becomes a very distant prospect, especially in timelines. And I was just reading this morning about Mars, and Mars apparently 1 billion years ago, the scientists are saying, had a lot of water and oceans, and it was habitable.
And they keep looking for the water.
Absolutely, and they found it. Today, apparently, there were British scientists who found that there were oceans on Mars. So if you think of that, we can't even imagine the time.
Right.
So it's just unfathomable. But if it does hit us, I have students who experienced Hurricane Sandy, and their houses were flooded, their parents were distraught, they were displaced from their homes, and or they lost their beach houses or whatever. That's when they start to connect and understand that the climate is changing and that there is extreme weather.
So we talk about that. Now, why is it so difficult to just explain to people? Why can't we just tell them what's happening? I think I was told something like 99% of scientists believe
I think it's
that
about 97% of scientists, something like that, 98, believe that the climate has changed and that it's man-made.
And so that's a lot, and that means there's 2% that don't.
Right.
And I guess somebody could say, well, they could be right.
Absolutely. It's also uncomfortable for most people to think about climate change because we want things the way they are, and there's a kind of strange quality when nature starts being extreme. The other day, the chipmunks are back, but they're, in the snowy landscape, but they're greeted with, a huge amount of snow. And we see crocuses coming up, in January. We see animals where they're not supposed to be. And so there's something up. There's something strange going on. And of course, I think the popular culture and media grabs onto extreme weather. And we all know what kind of weather reports there are now. I mean, I think a lot of weather people go out and love to be in the snow or in the hurricanes or this, what is it, this thunder snow now?
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so there are a lot of unusual weather events now, and it's going to get worse. And so I think the media is a part of this kind of, I don't want to call it conspiracy, but it's a pattern of behavior that is alarmist.
Well, the media gets criticized for a lot of things, and I think to some extent maybe they can't help it because they have to compete so much for attention. Do you think that's part of it?
I think we have so many things that are competing for all our attention. And with the move from a book culture, basically, to an on-screen culture, an internet culture, we have a popular culture and we have media where every news story is breaking news. And everything's important.
They say that all the time. Breaking news.
Breaking news, yeah.
And it won't be that breaking sometimes.
Exactly. And then, the crawl on the bottom of the screen.
Oh, yes.
That started right after 9/11 and the catastrophe in New York City. And that crawl tends to, I would say, democratize, make everything a news story. So what you have is you have Kim Kardashian and her latest hair color next to llamas breaking out of a nursing home, next to the fact that the seawater level in New York City and on the East Coast has risen 4 inches in the last decade.
And so you're saying they're all expressed in the same dramatic tones?
And they're all equal. They're all equal. There's no
they're all just breaking news.
Yes, it's all breaking news, and it's all part of what we in literature call pastiche, which is.
You're going to have to explain that.
Yeah,
one.
I'll explain it. Pastiche is a form of painting in which you put together various tidbits or bites, where there are different styles and different.
Is that a little bit
elements.
like a montage?
Yeah, and it's like it's like a mosaic. And so I think the news becomes a kind of mosaic or montage where it's very hard to make any kind of critical judgments about the stories because they're all rated the same way. And so climate change gets lost in the noise.
And so I guess I would imagine when I think of some of the news programs of people talking, you'll have several guests, and they often have people with polemical views. So they'll have people who are totally biased because maybe they're a speaker for a certain viewpoint. Not too many scientists who are just trying to tell you a broad and complicated picture, but somebody who's got a point of view.
I call it the Crossfire technique. Do you remember the program?
There was a program,
yeah,
yes.
Crossfire on CNN. And all the news programs and all the talking heads have adopted that Crossfire mentality where it's either or, black or white, binary oppositions, polarities, duality, and so there's no gray. There is no nuance.
Now, a lot of news has gone to the micro news, the Facebook post, the Twitter feed. How do you think that fits in?
I think, again, there is a lack of substance or depth in the news. I mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, you can get stories in the New York Times or the Atlantic or what we call high culture or elite culture magazines and publications. And the Science Times, you know, the magazine and the Times can give us a long, long story. But most people's attention span is about 2 minutes.
Yeah, and we're not helping that by creating more discipline. Read a whole long book or memorize a poem or something like that.
I have trouble. I'm an English professor, so I have trouble getting my students to read because they're so, which is sad to say, but they are very fixed on the screen. Life on the screen, and so videos.
By screen, I first thought you meant a movie screen, but that's not what you meant.
It's all kinds of screens. It's a movie screen. It is an internet. You know, it's a computer screen. It's a video game. It's all about what we call in academia visual culture.
We went to a concert this past week, and I saw a lot of students working with their phones.
Well, you can go out to dinner and you can see, you know, a couple on a date, and all they do is look at their cell phones. And unfortunately, there's a certain kind of communication that is lost when people are, you know, there's a kind of addiction to this. And so I think that addiction prevents us from really thinking critically about what we're absorbing in the news.
Okay, so we've gone through, and I'm sure we haven't exhausted the reasons why it's difficult, but let's look at now what is communicated and try to analyze that a little bit. How are people getting images of climate change?
Well, of course, we have that famous image of the polar bear stranded on an ice floe.
Right.
And that has become iconic in terms of climate change. I think some scientists are dissatisfied with that image, but there is a kind of pathos involved. And I would say that the climate change is communicated most through emotion and through...
So that's the most effective way.
Yeah, if you move people emotionally and get to where they're living and also get to concrete examples.
So in the polar bear example, you see the bear and you see him probably on a piece of ice that's not connected to anything, and you think that's melting.
That's melting, and he is isolated, or he or she is isolated, and it's not of the animal's own creation. This is happening, and I would say, and I teach film, I would say that film and cinema has been the most powerful way to communicate climate science. Now, some of these are not particularly accurate, and go into the realm of science fiction. But
examples?
Well, the first example would be Al Gore's film, An Inconvenient Truth. And Al Gore is not the most dynamic speaker. He is dry. He is sort of lifeless at times, and he has a lot of knowledge, and he's committed to the topic. But, there's a lot of yawning, and it's very didactic, meaning he's teaching. He's using a teachable moment, and he's using charts, and he's using visuals, but it doesn't really move people unless the person has already been moved to understand climate science.
Right.
There is another film that's a documentary film, and it's called Chasing Ice. I don't know if you've seen that, but
it's on my list.
It's by Orlovsky, and it was a 2011 film. And basically, it uses high-speed cameras to follow National Geographic photographers who are looking at ice and speeding up the disappearance of the ice in their future pacing, and seeing the ice disappear. What's moving about that particular documentary is that you can actually see climate change in motion and happening, and the glaciers are really like sculptures. They're aesthetic pieces of nature, and they are moving back, that the land is moving back, and so we're losing. It's a matter of loss, and that's very effective. I don't know how many people are exposed to that documentary.
Does it tie the receding glaciers to any effect on people?
Certainly on the animals. They really talk about the effect on animals, polar bears, and humans, but mostly the animals, and how the animals are struggling to survive. So I think that certainly has an emotional register with those of us who love animals.
Now, I used to think, and I know better now, but I wonder if the film communicated this, that, well, when this ice melts, the sea goes up, and I thought, well, gosh, how could there be that much ice? And then I also learned that, well, when the water is warmer, it expands. So both things together is what makes the difference. And does that film go into that?
Doesn't go into it as much as some of the latest reports.
Okay.
Which have to do with Antarctica and the ice really and the water threatening the world, not immediately, of course, but it will change the world.
And most of the people in the world live on coasts, right?
Exactly. And so the projections, 500 years New York will disappear and all that kind of thing.
500 years, though. Right.
Yeah, right. That's the whole thing. Who cares about 500 years? I'll be gone, all that kind of thing. But if we think about the Earth years, it's really a minuscule amount of time. So Chasing Ice is a good example of that.
Now, that's not something that a lot of people saw, probably, or is it?
No, I wouldn't say a lot of people see it. I think people at film festivals who follow film and documentaries in particular will see that movie. So, it's like when you watch the Academy Awards, there's an award for a documentary film, but not that many people have seen it.
Right.
However, there are a couple of films, I would say, that have used science fiction in order to really explore climate change. And the first of those...
Honestly, to do it honestly.
Well, one of them does and one of them doesn't.
Okay.
I would say the earlier one, and I think a lot of people have seen this film, is The Day After Tomorrow, which is science fiction at its most climate-y, where you have a father-son situation, and the father's a scientist, and he knows what's going to happen. And it really is a winter version, like we've just had, of climate change and the effects of an ice age on on Earth, and particularly on New York City, and the Northeast, where everything's happening. And you see the Empire State Building, you see the New York Public Library, where they're actually burning books, unfortunately. You see wolf packs in New York.
And now, why are they burning books?
Because they're freezing.
So they've already burned the furniture, I assume.
Yeah, right, exactly. They burn the furniture, and the last thing are the books. But it's also a survival movie. It's a everybody survives in that. But the imagery makes everything strange, and it defamiliarizes, to use a fancy term. It makes things strange and uncanny.
Now, is this good or bad in terms of communicating what's happening?
I think it's good. I think people really, that kind of science fiction registers with people. The other film that I was going to say is really science fiction is Interstellar.
And that's newer.
That just came out in
2014,
2014, I think. Yeah, even 14. I think it was November or something like that. And I've been reading a book about how they made it and basically the science behind Interstellar. They had a consultant who was an astrophysicist, whose name was Kip Thorne, who was mentioned at the Academy Awards. And he provided all kinds of scientific data and possibilities to the director and the screenwriter. And the director and screenwriter was Christopher Nolan, who has done Inception.
Oh, that was an amazing, amazing film.
And both of these films, what's interesting about both these films is that they play on the unconscious mind. What films do is to combine psychoanalysis and dream imagery and pull them together so that they're working both on the story, which is our conscious mind, but also on our unconscious mind. And Interstellar is about blight and drought, which we're experiencing now in Arizona, I believe.
Well, the Southwest has got serious water problems coming, and they're there now.
And they're there in California, where the farmers are having trouble, getting water for their crops and all this. And this is all connected with climate change too. And so the Earth is in a dire state with this blight. And again, it's a father-daughter story in this case, where the Earthlings, the Earth scientists, escape Earth, and there are time warps and space warps and black holes.
So it keeps you on the edge of your seat?
Yes, it does. But it's also a kind of fantasy about how humans can escape all this by finding other dimensions, other universes.
Now, I hope people think that part is not true.
Well, some of it is true. The black holes are true, and time warps and space warps are true.
But will we be able to go through them within 500 years and find peace and happiness?
Who knows? Bill Maher says that if you want to see what's going to happen in the future, you look at the movies. And
certainly Star Trek is...
Star Trek is coming true. And a lot of those disaster films, the Shelley Winters disaster, with the flooding and all that kind of thing, are sort of proleptic. They look into the future, too.
So we've got films. I know there's a Cli-Fi, which is climate fiction. And I hadn't even heard of that until we started talking about this project. That would have been last year. But there's a lot of books that have been cataloged and are truly based on climate effects on people.
Yeah, climate fiction is a whole new genre, and I think these films are a whole new genre. So I think that the communication is growing, and it's a topic that really stimulates the imagination and creates all kinds of fantasies too.
Well, then if you think that people are actually getting the message, do you think most people believe now that there is such a thing as climate change, and that it's
apparently
that we
51% do?
So just barely a majority.
Yeah, just barely a majority. And I don't think people have paid attention unless they are experiencing these extreme weather events. And then I think people do.
So I guess another question is, what can be done to change the way we are talking to people?
Well, there's a new institute at Yale. There's another one in the Midwest at the University of Chicago that are looking at ways to communicate climate science. And they've come up with a few protocols on how to do this. And one of them is that whoever is doing the educating must know his or her audience, know what kind of an audience there is, and how to grab the audience's attention. And whether you show films or you talk about the statistics or you show images or you really take people into museums where there's an awful lot of artwork and sculpture and architectural installations that really demonstrate this in a very graphic way.
Is part of the problem just in general education in this country? If you can't understand a graph and you really don't understand anything about statistics, it seems like many of the arguments that come from science are going to be not understood, or as you said, your eyes will glaze over.
Well, your eyes will glaze over, and the educational culture at this moment is being affected, as you said before, by the technology, by the attention span. And there's so many different interests that people have.
And that goes through all parts of the demographic, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And so it's a very difficult problem. I think the more extreme weather we'll have, and sort of the uncanny changes in nature, that is what's going to affect us and move us.
There have been philosophical arguments throughout history, as Thomas Aquinas, for example, or Pascal, and they would say, well, there's a bet. And in this case, it seems like that's really appropriate. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I think right, exactly. I think the other thing that is really going to drive this whole thing is creating communities where people are doing activities that involve changing sort of the equilibrium, the status quo. And one of the things that we're doing with this project is to create possible food forests, and with art included in that. I was out in Seattle around Thanksgiving time, and what they're doing out there is incredible, including taxing the city inhabitants to provide food for people who are homeless and underprivileged and underserved. But they've created these beautiful gardens, and it all becomes part of a kind of community mission. And I think that kind of activity, group activities, creative projects are going to really turn the page.
That makes so much sense to me. You know, I think in terms of, we all look at things like poverty, we look at many things in the world where if we did more, we could fix something. And yet we don't do too much. And I think part of that is that our family has to come first, and that's kind of genetic. But then if we just looked at what we do with the money that we can afford after we've taken care of our family and made sure they can go to college, which is expensive, that effort, if we put effort there in what we might call leisure activities or volunteer work, we could probably do a tremendous amount.
Yeah, and they are doing that. It's not only in Seattle, but even I saw a couple of days ago that in Battery Park in New York City, they're going to have a forest and a garden, vegetable gardens and all this. And I think that when you start involving a lot of people and they get their hands in the soil and they're producing, breaking ground, producing vegetables, creating landscapes that are aesthetically beautiful, that you're marrying all the kinds of human desires and human needs, because the needs are not only for survival, for food and shelter, but it's also for uplifting the human spirit.
So then you're suggesting to me that I think some community activists could be the difference, because everybody needs a first step, right, for anything. And if we can't see how to make that first step, we don't move. We just say, yes, it's a problem, I understand that, but I don't know what to do. And so once you've broken it down and say, well, just take this step, now you're moving.
Yeah, and I think it becomes contagious. Once you start doing something like that, it becomes contagious, and so it becomes fun.
Anything else that you can say about this project or any project?
Well, I think I've been surveying the grant money coming out of the federal government and also out of certain kinds of foundations. And the Department of Agriculture is now offering grants in urban agriculture, because people are moving back to the cities and are engaging in these gardens and forests.
And there's a lot of recycling, for example, in gardens.
Yes.
And composting
and all that. And also, I think all the initiatives on food and what we should eat are a part of this initiative too, because when you're eating healthy food, you're feeling better, and not everybody has everybody can partake in, sort of the fancy foods. I mean, we have a food culture, we have a foodie culture, and I think maybe if the foodies got involved in this instead of taking pictures of their dinners, it might be a really good movement.
Right. Right, and you can go out in New York City and easily spend $200 or $300 or $400 or $500 for 2 people or more. I'm just being naive, probably. There's bigger ones than that.
Well, you can spend $400 on a bottle of wine.
Right.
So it's taking the love of food and nature and putting that all together and bringing it to a mass of people.
That's great. So anything we can do on a bigger picture in terms of all the players, businesses are big here too. We have people have a certain role to play, and they can go and do a garden or get involved in something, do more composting, not throw their plastic bags on the street, and at least put them in a landfill, which are
and they've done away with plastic bags in California already. And
right now in Germany, and Europe, they're working on taxing them to try to get them down.
And the Keurig cups apparently are terrible for the environment too. So I think there are a lot of things that we can do, but I think people have to get engaged at that nexus where they live. I mean, live spiritually.
Right. Okay.
And if someone's interested in making a film or making a video, anything like that, I know my students love making videos about this and documenting climate change. And so I think it's about finding where one's passion is and then engaging at that point. And then I think we also have to talk about tipping points. And, what is the tipping point? What are the various tipping points? When has it tipped over? And when is it too late? There are all these conversations about bees and the Maldives and bats.
Almonds. Which first they're threatened because the bees are collapsing, and now they're threatened because there's not enough water to maintain the almond trees.
So it becomes a matter of how much more do we want to lose?
And also the biodiversity. I think that's another issue, and a lot of people are working on that. We had in the newspaper Bob Riley's carry cows. That's a very small project, trying to keep that. But I know from a documentary that in Ecuador, there were thousands of types of potatoes, maybe 2,000 types of potatoes in all parts of the mountains and different heights and all around. One of those potatoes worked well in Ireland. And so they took this one potato to Ireland, and it was wonderful until a blight. And then a lot of people starved, and many people came to America. And we're doing that in our whole agricultural culture, where we have one kind of chicken and one kind of corn.
Right.
So there's a lot of things where even if it wasn't about climate change, we need to be smarter in how we work with our environment, since there's how many billion people do we have now? 3?
Yes. Yeah. 3 billion people, and it's going to become worse. And I don't mean to catastrophize, but there's going to be limited resources because of water and drought and food deficits.
And you don't have to tell China that. They're trying to build canals from the Himalayas to...
Right, exactly. So there are a lot of problems, but I think I see a lot of positive energies being devoted to this topic too.
So there are students that are interested, and I think people all around Albany and the suburban areas and the other cities.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are interested. We have the Radek Center We have the Albany Barn. We have a lot of community roots, I think it is. Used to be community gardens. So we have a lot of different agendas and organizations
And
that are part of
projects.
this. Yes, yeah. So it's very helpful.
So you would say get involved in something.
Absolutely. But where your passion is.
Sounds good. This has been interesting. I know we're going to keep working on it, and it's always good to work with you, and I thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, well, thank you.
I want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show and that you tune in again next time. Take care. How'd we do?
Great.